What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. From the place on the bottom left of your device's screen, we like it a magic. And you know what? Today's a zombie apocalypse. That's right. Remember like 5 years ago when everyone cared about the zombie apocalypse? It was like a real movement that people actually took seriously. Whatever happened to that? What a weird movement. But anyway, today it's actually happening. They're rising up, y'all. Get ready. But actually, they're not. They're not like rising up. They're coming out of a weird like sci-fi portal thing in the sky. I'm not really quite sure I get it. It's like George Romero and George Lucas directed a thing together. And come to think of it, this deck is actually just as cheesy and stupid and awesome as that film would be. So today, let's talk about Rakdos Invasion. And we're back. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? Now, today's deck is based around a card that reminds me of one of my favorite cards from one of my favorite blocks of all time. That's Bitter Blossom. This thing makes you a free creature every single turn at the relatively low cost of just one life for an evasive body on the battlefield. And back in the day, and even some now, it can just take over tables entirely by itself and end up being a really unstoppable creature factory against a lot of decks. And today, we can play with a card very similar to it, Dreadhorde Invasion. Now, Dreadhorde Invasion can't make flyers or anything, but Bitter Blossom has never made a 9/9 lifelink for me in my life, and this deck does so on a fairly routine basis. Now, the basic idea of this deck is super simple. We get a free creature every single turn without actually having to spend any mana, and in this color combination, we get crazy removal options that don't just remove creatures, but remove all kinds of stuff. So, basically, we don't have to spend mana on creatures, and we don't have to worry about getting bodies on the battlefield. That much is taken care of for us. So if we just concentrate on locking down our opponent's side of the board and denying them anything, well, we just basically win. We just basically win because it's not really a fair fight if we get a creature every single turn, but we also have an insane removal piece in our hand every turn. And that already unfair fight becomes even more lopsided when the zombie gets big enough, starts lifelinking on attacks, gaining you back all the life that you've lost to Dreadhorde Invasion up to that point. And that usually is the point in the game where the pendulum swings back in your favor. If you get one lifelink attack step off safely with a Dreadhorde token, then suddenly they have to block. They'll usually lose their creature. You gain 6 life, or maybe you just hit them in the face for 6 and go back up to, 20 or 18 or whatever. And that, again, is just a huge swing of the game in most cases. And you can sometimes even engineer this ahead of schedule before your opponent thinks that you can. We've got multiple ways of amassing in this deck outside of this card. So sometimes if you have a 4/4, your opponent thinks I'm safe for 2 turns, and then suddenly you amass 2, get that lifelink attack step in, and just crush all hope. Now, just to kind of finish up my thoughts on Dreadhorde Invasion for now, I'll bring it up a lot during this video, but for the moment, I do want to say I see the argument a lot online that this card is bad because your opponent can just remove the zombie token. And then what are you going to do if you had like a 5/5 zombie token? I'm just going to get another creature. That's what I'm going to do. The best thing about this card is actually exactly that argument. It works the other way. You see, if your opponent wastes a removal spell on one of your amass tokens, well then, you don't have to draw another creature. You just get one. They have to draw another removal spell, and that's why this card is so good. But for the time being, we got to keep it moving. There's a lot of cards in this deck. There's some 1-ofs and some 2-ofs and whatnot, but there are some 4-ofs left to talk about in the deck, and maybe the most surprising one is Toll of the Invasion. This card just does so much work. Especially on the play, this card is fantastic, getting really important 3, 4, and 5 drops out of people's hand. I mean, we got decks right now where people easily play Nissa on turn 3, and if you can take that away from them on your turn 3s, assuming that you win first, that's a huge play. Plus, you get to amass, which is pretty nice too, just kind of speed up the counter on your Dreadhorde Invasion if you played one on turn 2, and get the most important card out of your opponent's hand. That's actually a really nice thing to be able to do because red and black can kill creatures and planeswalkers pretty well, but they can't really deal with most other permanent types. We don't have a whole lot of action against artifacts and especially enchantments. Red and black are both quite bad at taking out enchantments specifically, but this can proactively take care of not only problem enchantments, but just problem cards in general, and that's a huge deal when you can actually focus some of your early removal on early creatures, use Toll of the Invasion to take out those 5 drops. But if we're taking playtesting as the ultimate example, then the best card in the deck is actually Widespread Brutality. I know that sounds crazy, but it turns out that Widespread Brutality won us way more games during testing than just about any other card. Dreadhorde Invasion included. It combines really well with Dreadhorde Invasion against pretty much any deck. If you're Zombie Amass, if you're a Mass token, I'm going to switch. Don't say Zombie Amass token, either Zombie token or a Mass token. Don't say both. But if our Zombie token is like a 4/4, we have our Dreadhorde Invasion out, then we can Widespread Brutality, just crush the board, usually, on the opponent's side, and then suddenly swing in for 6 lifelink. And again, that just wins games completely. But even if you don't have an Amass token out, sometimes it's kind of okay. There's plenty of, small ball creature decks in this format, from mono red, mono blue, most of the things in Simic Flash, mono white, white black vampires, Temur Elementals even, a bunch of decks that play like Llanowar Elves, Paradise Druid, or Incubation Druid on turn 2, or into Risen Reef on turn 3, and like even just a dry Widespread Brutality is amazing against all of those decks. But even if you just have like a 1/1 Amass token out when you play this, you go Toll of the Invasion into Widespread Brutality or something, it's a brutal card. I mean, it's true to life. The WB is brutal to watch in action, even though I'm not sure that the WB is even still a network. I think they're the CW now, but like, who knows? Who watches television, right? And I want to point this out before I'm done with the card. Against Control, it's not completely dead or anything like most sweepers would be, because at least it's a 4-mana 2/2, or a 4-mana +2/+2 counters on a creature you already had. And sometimes that's really important, again, for like skipping ahead and going ahead and getting that lifelink before your opponent thinks you have the ability to do it. There's just so much good about this card. It's literally never dead, even if your opponent doesn't have creatures, and that's awesome. There's one more 4 in this deck, and that's Bedevil. Just having this in the 3-drop slot is an excellent option. There's so many Planeswalkers in the format right now, from a million different Chandras to Big Liliana to both Teferis, until rotation hits. But even then, we'll still have a Teferi in the format to worry about that everyone hates. So there's a ton of Planeswalkers. So even against Control, again, this is not a dead card, but against all manner of creature-based decks, or decks that just want to cast Nissa on turn 3, and you're like, instant speed. Well, it's still your turn to bust that Bedevil. You worked so hard for that Nissa, and I feel terrible. Bedevil is just a really, really good card, and I feel no shame about playing all 4 copies of it, because you'll want it pretty much every time you draw it. But Bedevil is not it by any stretch of the imagination. I've actually already shown you a few different removal pieces, but buckle up, because like most of the deck is removal. So we go ahead and show you a few different pieces at the same time, just so we can breeze through the removal suite together. We're playing a couple of copies of Shock to get started, 3 copies of Lava Coil, and then 2 copies of Angrass Rampage. Let me talk about all these real quick. Now, Angrass Rampage is one of the few cards in this color combination that can actually, like, nail artifacts. Yeah, I know red can kill artifacts, but this is the best card for main decking and being able to take out artifacts. But that's not even the best part of the card, honestly. Sometimes this is a great, like, 2-mana way to kill a Nissa that they just played, or a Teferi or something like that. I mean, 2 mana is an amazing rate to kill their only Planeswalker. That's just so good, but it's even decent in the early game if they lead on a creature you really don't want to see. This is a fantastic card, even if you have to burn it somewhat early. But there's a lot of decks right now where people are just trying to get like one big creature out. Like, I keep playing against a bunch of different like Reanimator decks on Arena, and this card is very good against decks that just want to get a Villas or Drakaseth or something like that on turn 4. So Ingress Rampage is awesome. Oh, and by the way, it also takes out like hexproof stuff, so keep that in mind. It's just a really, really powerful card, and I want at least a couple of copies of it. But Lava Coil is just basic creature removal. It's 2 mana to kill most things, especially in the early game, so we'll play a few copies of that. And then Shock. This was Disfigure for the longest time, but I've been playing Shock here lately, and to gather clips and whatnot for the deck. And I just think it's the much better card. I mean, we can get black mana more easily than red mana, which was my justification for Disfigure. Plus, like, there's a Danto Vanguard to worry about and such, but especially after rotation, we won't have to worry about a Danto whatsoever. So I think Shock's a better card in that situation, but Shock can also target Planeswalkers, kill them sometimes, or even just kill the opponent. Like, check out this game where double Shock actually ends a nail biter that I was almost sure we were going to lose. But there's a few more pieces of removal in the deck, because we're running 2 copies of Bedeck Bedazzle, 2 Flame Sweep, and 3 Duress, which I'm sort of counting as removal. Main deck Duress is so good. Again, there's a bunch of Planeswalkers out there in the format right now, and Duress is an amazing 1-mana proactive way to take away someone's entire game plan on turn 1. And even if there's like nothing in their hand you can actually get, which will occasionally happen, then you at least get the information, and if you weren't going to do anything with your mana on turn 1, that's worth a card. Most of the time, to get information on your opponent's game plan, see what you're playing against, and plan accordingly yourself. There's a lot to be said for just seeing their hand on turn 1, but getting the best non-creature, non-land card out of it is sometimes just a game over before the game even starts. So, yeah, this probably should be in the board, but honestly, turn 1 Duress has kind of ended up winning us a bunch of games, because you just get the best threat. You know, you get the Nissa that they're trying to get to, so it's just, it's a really, really hot card in the main deck right now specifically, and I don't actually see that changing too much after rotation. It all depends on what's in Throne, but main deck Duress has really served me well, and I highly recommend you try it before you cut the card from the main deck. Aside from that, though, there's Bedeck Bedazzle. Don't laugh at this one either. Bedeck Bedazzle can take out a Danto Vanguard while it's still in the format, so keep that in mind. But the card does lots of other stuff, too. It's basically, you know, Lightning Strike, 2 mana, kill that small thing, which is what you're going to use it for. Like 7 to 9 times out of 10. It's very, very likely what you're going to do with it, but there's other stuff you can do with it. If your, you know, a mass token is a 4/4 and the coast is clear, you can go ahead and get lifelink that turn, kid. That's a really sweet play with it. But there's also the Bedazzle half. This is the part you probably want to laugh at, but right now, Field of the Dead is a very important card in this format, and the ability to just kill a Field of the Dead is kind of nice sometimes. And Flame Sweep, pretty much everything I said about Widespread Brutality applies to Flame Sweep, just only in the 3-drop slot, which is like way better than a 4-drop that does the same thing. But it's better than Widespread in a few different ways, in some situational ways. Not only does it cost 1 less mana, but it's also instant speed and really, really easy to cast for this deck. I was playing Cry the Carnarium for a while, and yeah, we have to worry about a Danto Vanguard, and in some cases we have to worry about like Aristocrats decks that play Cruel Celebrant or Midnight Reaper or Judith, and they get a bunch of triggers when all their creatures die to Flame Sweep. So Cry of the Carnarium might be the better choice, but this is way easier to cast, and it's instant speed, and it still just wipes out, you know, blue-white flyers, Temur Elementals in the early game at the very least, black-white vampires, any mono-colored aggro deck in the format. There's just so many things Flame Sweep is good against, and we need it more often than you might think in the main deck. It's just really nice to have a gang of 6 sweepers in here, because it really makes our life more easy against aggro. And it also rids their side of the board of all those bothersome creatures so they can live their lives with less clutter. That's a good thing for them. But surprise, we're actually playing another creature in this deck. I'm running 2 copies of Cavalier of Night in what is probably the most flexible slot in the deck, but Cavalier comes in handy an awful lot. If we can't quite get to 6/6 on an amass token and start lifelinking, well, Cavalier of Night has lifelink, and that can really help when we're trying to gain back some of that life that we've been losing, especially against aggro decks. Cavalier of Night is an insane brick wall that they can't lava coil. Most of their removal isn't going to kill this against mono red especially, and it's really good against their burn spells, gains you back 4 life a turn, brick walls everything they're trying to attack into you with. Oh, and by the way, you can sacrifice a Dreadhorde token and suddenly just kill the biggest thing on their side of the table. So that's just, it's super good, but we're almost never going to be able to utilize the dies line of text on this card, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to cast, but it hasn't been so hard while we've been testing the deck out. So I have a lot of faith in this card, and it can turn the game around for you. Just be a big, meaty creature. There's a lot to like about Cavalier of Night, but again, I think you could flex this slot in a number of different ways. Now, we got a couple more cards to go over here, and let's start with the 2 copies of Chandra Fire Artisan, because I want a card advantage piece in the deck. I'm actually thinking of bumping this back up to 3 copies. It was 3 at the beginning, now it's down to 2, and now I want my 3rd copy again. So we just need some sort of card advantage engine, and I don't necessarily like Experimental Frenzy. I think of the 4-drop red card advantage engines in the format. This is probably the better one for this deck specifically. Drawing an extra card every turn is always awesome, while still having access to your hand. That's very, very sweet. And if your opponent wants to attack into this, they're going to take some damage as a result. And sometimes, against uncareful opponents, I guess you'd say, a Chandra Ultimate can even be an alternate win condition, like this game here. But we're not actually done with Chandras, because there's one more card in the deck, and that's the one copy of Awakened Inferno. This is also another sort of an alternate win condition. If you look at this kind of like a control deck that just wants to stick its 2-mana enchantment, you know, just like a Search for Iskanta or something, just like the blue-based control decks do. Stick a 2-mana enchantment, ride it all game, and suddenly, you know, once the game gets late enough, you can snowball that into a bunch of advantage. Well, that's kind of what this deck is trying to do, too. We're a control deck. We play a ton of removal spells, so in a lot of ways, we're a control. So we need alternate win conditions when our main condition doesn't pull through. That's the phrase I'm looking for in American English. And Chandra is a great way of having kind of an insurance policy. This is effectively another sweeper and another thing that takes out big creatures. And if we've been able to, you know, curate our opponent's side of the board to our liking, then we can just start making them take points of damage every single turn. And that'll win the game sometimes too. I've been in a couple of situations where I'm effectively trying to give them emblems fast enough to race me dying to my own invasion. And usually, Chandra will easily win that race. Now we're running 25 lands in this deck, making 16 black sources, 14 red sources. More than enough for pretty much anything that we're trying to do in this deck. Bloodfell Caves is a little bit more important than you might think, and I'm actually thinking about going up to 4. You'd be surprised how much 1 life means in some games. So I don't mind Bloodfell Caves, especially when we don't have Dragon Skull Summit anymore. And we'll throw in a copy of Blast Zone to have a 7th sweeper, because why not? I mean, it's never going to kill a Dreadhorde Invasion token. It's never going to kill a zombie, so yeah, well, might as well play Blast Zone, right? Now here's our pretty simple sideboard right here, and most of it is anti-control, although we are playing even more sweepers in the form of 2 Ritual of Soot for the deck, just in case we need to sweep the board every other turn. we can do that if we need to, and this can be an important card against aggro decks, as can Plaguecrafter on occasion, so keep that in mind. But Plaguecrafter is actually really good against control when it makes them sacrifice Planeswalkers, or even just discard cards from their hand. Once we put in the 4th Duress, we've got up to 11 ways of making a control opponent discard cards, so keep that in mind too. Plaguecrafter is awesome in this deck, but aside from those control cards, we've got also Noxious Grasp and Fry, both in the deck to just obviously hone in on very specific decks in the format. Fry specifically good against control decks, but it's even decent against Temur Elementals some of the time, because it's going to take out blue creatures as well. And it's going to be good against like the Mono Blue and Simic Flash decks as well, so keep that in mind. Fry's a really good card aside from just killing Esper, but so is Noxious Grasp. This is going to take out a bunch of really important creatures in the format right now too, and a bunch of other, you know, Planeswalkers and whatnot. So just keep in mind, Noxious Grasp is also just about as good as Fry is in the format right now, and it gains us a life back. If a life is important on Bloodfell Caves, it's important on Noxious Grasp. Aside from that, though, there's Tibble in there. This will help against control. They won't be able to gain life. And it's a creature factory. That's nice to have. And Legion Warboss, just exactly as a boss against control decks. This is going to eat 3-mana Teferis alive and just present an ever-growing board to your opponent to force them to draw Kaya's Wrath. But anyway, here are your power rankings right here. Final score adds up to 62, which isn't bad for what you're paying for the deck. All total, this thing's only about $100, a little bit more on TCG Player right now, and you get to play it for well over a year. That's not a bad investment for what is straight up and down the line just a decent sort of dirtily mid-range control type deck. As far as the power score, we'll just barely give it a 7 just because like all of our removal is really good. Even Bedeck Bedazzle, even though it doesn't see all the play in the world, really good removal spell. But Dreadhorde Invasion's good, both Chandras are good, even Cavalier of Night is a pretty high power card, so I think we should score it at least a 7 here. As far as speed, probably the worst aspect of the deck. We have to wait a few turns, to say the least, to start even lifelinking with an invasion token. But once you can get there, you can close games out really, really quick. But again, it takes a long time of slowly removing your opponent's side of the board, hitting them with a sweeper here, spot removal there, sweep removal again on the next turn, and then suddenly you'll end up with a 6/6 amass token and you can start beating face. But it's going to take a minute to get to that point, so it's not a very fast deck. As far as synergy, we're also not actually that synergistic. You know, again, we're just a pile of removal, plus Dreadhorde Invasion and a few other really powerful cards. So even though there's some synergy here and there in this deck, it's not synergy driven in almost any way. But it is fairly versatile. Not only can we remove creatures and planeswalkers really well, but Angrass Rampage lets us take out the odd artifact from time to time, and if there's a permanent type we have a real problem with, we can just make them discard it with Duress or Toll of the Invasion. So we've got a lot of different ways to remove things from our opponent's game plan, and we get a free creature every turn once we get Dreadhorde Invasion out, and that's good against a bunch of different decks. It's actually kind of decent against aggro and control, depending on what their game plan is. So it's actually relatively versatile in not only what it can do with its cards, but how it can perform against a variety of decks. Now, you'd think that Resilience would be a higher category here just because we can get lifelink. Plus, we've got big planeswalkers like Chandra to swing the game in our favor, Cavalier of Knights. We are sort of middle-of-the-road resilient. We've got some resilient stuff, but I mean, like, if you're playing against Burn, an enchantment that deals damage to you every turn isn't exactly ideal, and I shouldn't have to tell you that. So, resiliency does suffer in some avenues, but in other ways, it's not so bad. So, middle of the road. Now, our offense, also fairly low. We've got Dreadhorde Invasion, not a whole lot else. Again, Planeswalkers will win the game for us. Cavalier of Knights, a meaty creature. But for the most part, we really care about defense. So offense isn't exactly our thing. We just want to eventually win, and that's not really conducive to a high offense score. So we'll give it a 3, but defense, off the charts. Again, we can remove pretty much any permanent type so long as we do it proactively with discard. But even once a permanent hits the table, if it's a permanent that can win the game for them, most of the time a planeswalker or a creature, we can take care of that. That's no problem, kid. Not a deal whatsoever. So defense is actually super high, and if something hits the table, we can take care of it. We can take care of it in many cases before it even does that. Game 1, we'll give it an 8, and that was a hard one to determine. Again, we went 11-4 in testing, won a bunch more games outside of just gathering clips and whatnot, and it's lost to and beaten both Mono Red and Esper, but it's beaten a bunch of other really important meta decks right now. Any number of Nissa decks you might want to bring up, Team Elementals as well. It has beaten a lot of important meta decks, including Scapeshift, Black-White Vampires over and over. We just trounce most aggro decks. We get to play 6 main deck sweepers and then 2 more in the sideboard. So again, the defense score, very, very high. But even though we're like a mid-range deck or even a control deck in that sometimes we'll draw the wrong half of our library in game 1, it doesn't hurt us that much. Because again, we can take out and respond to most threats while freely creating threats of our own. And that's good against most decks. So again, just with the win percentage and with how this deck impressed me against a variety of different deck types, I'll give it an 8 in game 1 and a 7 in game 2 because our sideboard is really good. We don't really suffer that much in games 2 and 3, and in some ways you could argue we do even better. We've got a fantastic sideboard in this color combination. I just said sometimes we'll draw the wrong half of our deck in game 1. Well, in game 2 we can shore up some of those problems, and especially against control decks, we can ditch all the removal that's dead in game 1 and play nothing but cards that are relevant against them. So we really do shore up a lot of problems in game 2. But that said, there are a lot of sideboard options that can respond to us. Anytime an opponent has something that busts enchantments, we're in trouble, and it turns out there's a lot of those in sideboards. And for the consistency, we'll give it an 8. Again, there's a lot of 2-ofs and even a 1-of here in this deck. And sometimes that'll lead to drawing the wrong half of your deck, especially considering the only card advantage piece we really have is Chandra. We've only got a couple of copies of that. So there are going to be times where you get down to top deck mode, and that's going to hurt your consistency. There are going to be games where you don't draw your Dreadhorde Invasion for like the first 6 turns. That seems to hurt your consistency because, the whole deck is about dropping it early and then protecting the board. So there are going to be games that don't necessarily fall in line with your game plan, but for the most part, this is a pretty consistent deck. There's no mana issues, and even if it does take you a turn or 2 extra to get your Dreadhorde Invasion, you can usually control the board state well enough up to that point. Now it's time to go over our losses. I keep saying we went 11-4, so what did we lose to? Well, we lost a game to a Black-White mid-range deck. That was our first loss. It was a really cool deck, by the way. It wasn't White-Black Vampires. Just like Black-White mid-range with a bunch of, huge things. The top end of the curve. It was a good deck. At least it looked cool. And we had a loss to Mono Red. Both players were at 1 when we lost this game. This is actually a nail biter. This is nail baiter. It means something totally different. This is a nail biter. And we were both at 1 when I lost this game. And this is one of those that I want to upload. But anyway, what else did we lose to? Mono Blue Tempo completely trounced us in a game. And then we lost to Esper. Although, I want to point out here, we also won a game against Mono Red. And we won a game against Esper as well. So kind of a wash as to that. But the second game that Esper beat us, they beat us bad. So just keep that in mind. But what did we, I mean, we won against a bunch of decks too. We won against, again, Mono Red, Blue White Flyers, an Esper deck, a Green Black Aggro deck, a Blue Green Flash deck. Mono Red Calamity we won against. A lot of this was Widespread Brutality. We won against Boros Feather because of like 3 sweepers in a row. We won against Temur Elemental. They were mana screwed. Chandra's Ultimate won against Black White Vampires. You saw that clip. Chandra 6 mana won against Boros Aggro. I think I showed you that clip too. And then we won against Mardu Aristocrats to cap things off. So again, we won against a wide variety of deck types in testing here, and it really made me take this deck a lot more seriously than even I originally took it. So I hope you get a chance to try this thing out. Again, I think I'm going to upload a little bit of gameplay and, like, you know, dub some commentary over it because I didn't have the microphone on for the games. So again, if you're interested in that, then just let me know down there in the comment section. I'll have that uploaded tomorrow, I think. But in any case, I hope you're interested in this deck. Again, it turned out way better than I thought it was going to, just kind of on paper. But it turns out it works the way you draw it up. So if you're interested in it, then click the first link in the description and go over to TCG Player. They sponsor your boy. They pay me to say their name. But the reason that I signed the contract is because I can truthfully tell you they're the lowest place you're going to get this deck. Again, just over about $100. It's going to cost you way more than that on most other sites. So make sure you click the link if you're interested in it. Buy it from the cheapest place you can get it. Aside from that, if you don't have the skrill to buy the deck, I understand that. There's stuff you can do for free. Just like the video before you cut out the lights. Subscribe if you're new. We've got a lot of content. Throne of Eldraine spoilers, rotation-proof stuff. I want to do all kinds of stuff. Like, I asked my patrons for this last poll if we could do like a top 10 EDH cards from Mirage. I really want to do that video. Let me know if you want that in the comment section. I love covering nostalgic sets for EDH. So let me know if you want to see that. Lots of content planned. So sub if you're new, if you haven't done it yet. And then consider joining the Patreon. It's only $1 a month. Again, if you don't have the skrill to buy the deck, if you got $1 in your pocket, head over to Patreon and help vote on decks we want to see next. And I'll give you that for $1. Some value, you know. I'm just going to take $1 from you every month. I'm not that kind of person. Anyway, if you feel like doing it, do it. If not, I'm just glad that you're still here. The watch time matters. So anyway, I'm Deb, and this is Ziggy. He's been on my lap this entire time. He's just like slightly too far down to actually see him. He's a sleepy bub. Anyway, I'm Deb from The Place, and this is my cat. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.